Hello, happy Memorial Day weekend.
Hello.
Hi, Shalima.
Shalima.
I always say your name wrong. I hope we're saying it right. One of us has to be saying it right. Shalima is how I say it. Shalima sometimes is how I say it. So when one of us says it correctly, just say our name. So we know how to say it. Hey, Criminal Mind.
Hey, Criminal Mind.
I'm in StreamYard chat, so I think I have a little delay. I forget which one's delayed, the YouTube side or the StreamYard side. Oops. Let me get my Coke Zero for my pet. Pepping my step. I was up early.
Okay, so you're going to have to bear with us because I'm trying to learn how to screen share from my side, and
I think she's mastered it. To be quite honest, you've come a long way in the last 10 minutes. So I feel like you figured out a lot more than I could ever figure out.
I'm an expert.
I'm sure somebody will help us. Something keeps beeping. All right. If you want to just give you want to start with a little rundown what we're going to be doing today, and then we'll get into stuff.
So we're doing the case of Holly Bobo. This is a case that took place in Darden, Tennessee. So we're going to talk about that today. And this is a case that I have studied extensively. I've got probably 50 to 60 pages of handwritten notes on this. And it's a case where I kind of don't believe they have the right people charged with it and in prison. So we're going to just go over the case, some of the details. I'm going to try to not go overboard with it because I literally watched the court trial and took notes on everybody's what they said and evidence. And so I'm going to try to not go overboard. But so that's what we're going to be talking about today. There are, two people still in prison. One of them is life with no parole. So that's what we're going to do. Do you want me to start, Audie, or?
There's a lot of interesting, I think this case was very polarizing just from what, when I was reading up on it and learning about it. One of the things I thought that was quite interesting, and I guess maybe a lot of cases go this way. If you read, let's say all of the video, let's say from YouTube alone, just any coverage this case got, and you go and look at the comments, it's pretty split on either they have the right people, they don't, and then accusations towards one individual that wasn't obviously charged. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of it mixes quite a bit on what people believe really happened. And yes, there is quite a rabbit hole and a lot of conspiracies, and I'll be asking questions as well because I know you know so much about this, and there's a couple things I do have questions about, so we'll obviously go over that. But you can kind of I think you know this case so well that you should go with the introduction and stuff and explain who she is and everything. And then if you want me to put that picture up, I will. Just tell me when.
Okay, yeah, you can go and put it up. I don't know if I'll be able to change to the next one, but yeah.
We'll figure it out as we go. It's up though.
Okay, so Holly Bobo was a 20-year-old nursing student at the University of Tennessee. They're in a small town, Darden, Tennessee, that is a lot of rural areas and a lot of hunting, that sort of thing. The houses are really far apart. They're right next to the Tennessee River. So she, as you can see from the picture, she's beautiful. She was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, petite girl. She was living with her parents and her older brother, Clint. So the morning of April 13th, 2011, she had gotten up early to study for a nursing exam that day. And she saw her dad that morning. He got up to go to work, and she was in the bathroom, and he, the normal dad thing, knocked on the door and asked her if she needed anything. He left her some gas money on her purse. When her mom got up to go to work, her mom was a teacher at an elementary school. Holly was sitting at the kitchen table studying and texting with one of her fellow classmates in nursing school. So she was last seen alive by her brother Clint, and that was shortly before 8 a.m. So this is one of the big things that people have a lot of questions about, because the circumstances of how she disappeared and what her brother was able to report are kind of sketchy. I don't so much think they are, because I can understand what he was probably thinking. So what happened was he was sleeping. He said he did have his surround sound on in his room. So I don't know what it was playing, but there was noise in his room. He woke up and heard voices like arguing. So he looked out his window and could see on the carport Holly and a male that they were kneeling down, and he assumed that it was Holly's boyfriend, and that they were having an argument over something. So he laid back down, and the dog started barking. So he got back up and looked out the window again and saw Holly walking with this man into the woods behind their house. Now, there's a trail. It's a very wooded area, and I'll show pictures of that in a little bit. But it's a very wooded area around their house, and there's a path that goes to a logging trail behind their house. And that logging trail comes back around out to the road that they live on through the woods. So the man was dressed in all camouflage. Clint did hear his voice, and he described him as being about 6 foot tall and 250 pounds. So I'm going to kind of look at my timeline here to get this right. Back up. I forgot something. Sorry. At about 7:30 that morning, Holly did speak to her boyfriend, Drew, on the phone, and this is kind of where his alibi is confirmed, because she spoke with him. He was hunting on her grandmother's property that was a little while away, and there was some trouble with some of the family members had come out and caught him on the land, and there was some confusion. So he had actually called Holly to let her verify that he was allowed to be on the land hunting. And in turn, Holly called her mom, who called the grandmother and straightened everything out. So we know that her boyfriend was on this property during this time hunting. So Holly's last outgoing call on her phone was at 7:42 a.m. And this is kind of a time, 2011, all the phones didn't have GPS where they could track consistently. They had to do pings, and you had to call the cell phone provider to get them to do that. And you have to specify how often you want them done. So it's not like today where there's a continuous GPS with the phone.
And I think this has come up before about pings, and I know you'll elaborate on it, but there's been so many cases where these pings have been really important, but then turn out to be either not accurate and things like that. So I always think that's interesting when the cell phone pinging comes up.
Yeah. And it's strange in this case. It doesn't really go with what the prosecution was saying.
Yep.
So at about 7:45 a.m., a neighbor heard screaming. Now there's probably, I think they said about 450 feet between the houses. There's a line of trees, and he says he heard a scream, and he stood at the tree line looking over in the direction of the Bobo's house, but he never saw anything. He said his dogs were barking, and he said he stood there for a few minutes and then went back to loading his truck up for work and didn't really think too much about it because he couldn't see anything going on. He got in his truck and drove to the end of his driveway, and he said he turned his vehicle to kind of face the Bobo house just to watch for a few more seconds to see if he saw anything else going on, and he didn't. So he drove away. He did call his mother, who also lived on the property, and ask if she would call Karen Bobo, the mom, and just let her know that they had heard a scream in that direction and make sure everything was okay. So the neighbors, so the mother calls Karen, and Karen is at work at this time, and lets her know about the screaming. And as soon as Karen gets off the phone, she calls Clint, the brother, and tells him she's kind of course, very frantic, and tells him to get a gun and shoot him. And Clint's very confused because at this point, he's still thinking that that's her boyfriend and doesn't understand why his mom is having such a meltdown over this. And
can I chime in real quick? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I just this stands out to me because I remember initially watching this not this specific coverage at the time, but I love that chapter so much, and he did cover this. And I remember I rewatched it yesterday, and I was like, oh, I forgot I had watched this already. And that one particular stream of events with her calling Clint, mom calling Clint, I'm coming, honey, mom calling Clint and saying, that's not Drew, shoot him, get a gun and shoot him. Like, and I kind of understand how Clint was like, wait, what? Like, you're telling me to go kill somebody? Yeah. Like, it is very extreme. And I also thought, now I have mixed feelings about this, though, because if we could all put ourselves in this position, the neighbor calls and says, I hear screaming coming from the house. The brother says, no, it's a guy out there with sis, but mom knows for a fact that boyfriend is turkey hunting because she had to confirm that with the family, with the property issues and him being there. So I can get, like, being concerned. I just don't know that, like, get a gun and shoot him would be the first response versus, like, call 911 or go out there, tackle the guy. I don't know. Maybe. Yeah. It's just different. That sticks out to me. It really does.
Yeah, and I can see, Clint had just woken up. How some people don't just jump out of bed and are bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. So he had just woken up, probably was trying to orientate himself to what's going on, and then he's got his mom telling him to go shoot what he thought is Holly's boyfriend. So she hangs up with Clint and she calls 911. And I don't understand this part because she says she called and she was in a different county. And so something happened and she acted like they didn't take a report because she called the wrong county, which wouldn't they just transfer her to the right county?
That's and I don't know, I'm sure every state, every town, every whatever is different. Like and it's very different, I think, where I live, where, like, a county is made up of a lot of towns. So all of our 911 calls are automatically go to the sheriff, and then the sheriff dispenses it to the local town. So I don't know how that works. So, like, I don't know how big your counties are, how big the counties are in Tennessee. And but yes, I would think they'd be like, wait, we're going to get people there, but you're calling, Red County, not Blue County. You know what I mean? I don't know. I would think there's some way of, even in 2011, I mean, it wasn't that long ago. Like, the technology wasn't terrible.
Yeah, I thought that was strange. I didn't really. And I don't know if she just got flustered when she heard it was the wrong county and hung up, because apparently she was really, frantic. So
At the end of our, like when we get time, when we're done going everything, I have the 911 call.
Oh, okay. So after Karen had the first time hung up with Clint, and this is when he looked outside and saw them walking into the woods. So at this point, after what his mom had said, he's looking and he starts to realize that the man is larger than Drew. And I've got some pictures of the two of them together where you can see that she's 5'3" and he's not that much taller than her. He's definitely not 6 foot. So at this point, he's realizing that this doesn't look like Drew. So Clint tries to call Holly's phone, and he tries to call Drew's phone, but neither call was answered. Of course, Drew was hunting, so I'm sure his phone was on silent. After Karen had gotten the wrong county on 911, she called Clint again. So Clint told her what he had seen, and she told him to call 911. He went inside and got a gun, went out to the carport area, and he found bloodstains on the garage floor, and he called 911. So the police arrived about 10 minutes later. Karen had already called. Her dad's name is Dana, which is interesting, but she had called him. He was having someone at work drive him home, and he says by the time he got to the house that he had to park quite a distance away because there was so many people already there. And there were some strange things about the first officer that arrived on the scene. He didn't try to go, Clint told him what he had seen, and he didn't walk back to the path to see. I mean, I understand that he was by himself and they probably need backup, but at the same time, somebody's being abducted and it's one guy, and he didn't even go back there to see if he could see anything. Nothing was like taped off. I know when the dad got home, he said that he took his own duct tape and taped off the carport area because there were searchers literally trampling everywhere.
They said, one of the things I listened to said that the crime scene was a debacle. Like it was totally destroyed. Like any valuable evidence. Sorry, that could have been collected.
Tub.
No, she's saying stop. I'm gonna wake up the baby. I don't know what baby.
Wake up my baby.
Oh, I'm gonna wake up her baby. Okay. Anyway, yes, that it was all contaminated, basically.
Yeah. They just hadn't roped anything off, and the first officer there hadn't done anything to preserve it. There was no roadblocks ordered. I think even some of the first officers there weren't told about the logging road back there to go and check it. And then whenever he called the cell phone carrier, he ordered, oh my gosh, why don't I have that written down? I think he ordered them every 15 minutes. And you can literally get them like minute by minute. But I don't know if he didn't know that or what, but he...
that's a huge issue because much can happen in 15 minutes. Also, I think what was, and I don't know, maybe I'm being naive here. I don't know if this played a role that they just were inexperienced police officers. Maybe it's like a quiet town where the most they deal with is maybe like not saying that drug busts can't be serious, but you know what I mean? Maybe this was just something so out of their scope that they just were frazzled themselves. But I have a couple, as we go through this, I have some other feelings about it, but they definitely bumbled it from the gate.
Yes, for sure. So Clint, of course, gave a statement that morning, and some of the things that the details that he gave, were the description of the man, his voice. One of the things that was different that day, Clint didn't usually park his truck inside. They had a garage and a carport. His truck was out where people could see it. For some reason, he had pulled it into the garage the night before. So anybody that knew that family's routine could go by there and they would have thought Clint wasn't home because they couldn't see his truck when it was normally visible. So that was something I thought was interesting because to me, that tells me that it's probably somebody that goes by there frequently and would recognize something like that. And the other detail was that he saw something in the man's hand. And, at the time, thinking that it was Drew that had been hunting, he thought it was a grunt call in his hand. But later, after thinking about it, he said it could have been a gun.
I'm sorry, what did you say that he thought it was? A what?
A grunt call.
What's that? Oh, for turkey hunting. Okay, got it. Okay.
Whatever, the noisemaker.
Yeah. I didn't even know it had a name. I just thought it was like a whistle. Then I thought of like that show where the duck hunters, they make those duck call things, whatever that show's called. Yeah. Got it.
Okay, so let's trying to see where
I'll put us up if you want to bring up the map of the area. I think that's a good one.
All right, I'll try.
You can do it.
You can do it.
I can remove this. Oh yeah, I can leave them up. Okay, perfect. You did it.
There's a lot of spots in this case. So I tried to kind of map them out so you could kind of see the layout of everything because it's spread around and it's rural. I cannot say that word. Rural. Okay, so we're gonna look at their house and I'll kind of show you. So you can see that woods everywhere. I mean, this is like the middle of nowhere. Okay, and so this is their home. And it's set back off the road a little bit. Not extremely visible. And I hate... The last time I made this map, you could see the logging road. It's really overgrown, but it kind of goes... This is the path that goes into the woods, and the logging road kind of loops around, and it comes out here on their road. And then this is the neighbor's house over here that called. So you can see this is kind of the line of trees where he stood. I don't know how much he would have been able to see. It would have had to have been something major, I think, for him to have seen anything. And then this is where he kind of pulled his car and faced that direction to see if he could see anything. So that's kind of the layout for that.
I mean, if you heard like screams coming from your neighbor's house, would you just instantly call 911, or would you kind of be like, maybe it's something, maybe it's nothing?
It depends. I mean, I don't think it wasn't like repeated, prolonged screaming. And I don't know what kind of noises normally came from that house.
Sure, you're right.
If I just heard a single scream and I wasn't really sure if that's what I had heard, it's so hard to say.
It really is. There's a lot of that in this case. There's a lot of like, what would you do? And then you kind of go back and forth when it comes to certain things.
But, at the same time, it's a pretty good distance. If you're hearing a scream, it was probably a pretty loud scream.
Especially in a dense wooded area,
Yeah. So the searching, started for Holly. I think the day after she went missing, the searching was actually called off for weather. But then it continued, and there was everybody. There was a lot of people involved in the search. Everybody knows everybody around here, and there's a lot of drugs in the area too, so that was another thing that played into this. I wanted to...
Yes, there was a huge
get a picture.
like methamphetamine and heroin epidemic in this particular area during that time.
Yeah, meth is a big problem around here. Trying to find... I'm going to get a picture if I can get it to pull up.
Okay.
Of some of the search parties, because I just kind of want to show the people in this area, like, everybody wears camouflage. So whenever you say somebody, was wearing camouflage, took her back into the woods, like this, everybody's wearing it.
Yeah, it's not unusual for that area, so it wouldn't stand out to anybody.
Yes. So can you see those pictures? Did it work?
Yes, it worked perfect.
Awesome. Okay. So this is just some of the search parties. And then, of course, her mom and dad talking to media, obviously very distraught. So her remains were found on September 8th, 2014. And they were found pretty close to a main highway, close to a cell phone tower.
Oh, did I lose you? If you're talking, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
Now I can.
So they found a skull and I think some ribs. So just some remains. A lot of remains had probably been drug off by animals because it was a very wooded area. Some of her belongings were there, some items out of her purse, things like that. And her death was ruled a homicide via a gunshot to the back of the head. So, when it comes to the case, 6 men were arrested in this case. Only 3 of them ended up being prosecuted. So 2 of the men, Jeff and Mark Piercy, they were initially charged with accessory after the fact and tampering with evidence. So they were arrested on the basis of testimony of Jeff's former roommate, who alleged that in May of that year, Jeff had showed her part of a video that showed Zach Adams, which was another man that got arrested, assaulting Holly, who was tied up and crying. And she told the police that she only saw a small clip of it and she didn't see any sexual assault actually occurring. So the police arranged for this roommate to make a recorded call to Jeff. So she told him over the phone, that video of Holly, if it had been you, I would have watched it. And to which Jeff replied, I know. So the roommate alleges that Mark Piercy was the one that recorded the video. So both brothers denied that this video existed. Jeff Piercy denied knowing any of the other men that got arrested besides his brother Mark. So when it comes to the phone call, he claims that he couldn't hear the roommate clearly during the phone conversation, and that his ex-wife's name was Holly, so it was easily confused. So the police analyzed over 20 phones and never found a video, so the charges were dropped for lack of evidence on those two men. So, kind of digging through my papers. The next one that actually didn't make it to trial was Shane Austin. And he ended up committing suicide before he was actually formally charged with anything. He had been offered, what's the word?
Immunity. He was offered immunity.
Yes, that's the word. For, turning on the other guys, and they weren't getting what they needed out of him. And so there was rumor that they were going to take back the immunity that was offered. So he had gone to Florida to do work and ended up found that he had committed suicide. So that's interesting. So the three remaining men that
Yes.
got charged.
And, oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, too, with the. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you? Oh, okay. I was going to say, too, the interesting thing about Shane was that originally, I think the brother, like, he was also at some point accused of being there at the Bobo residence, but like he did not fit the description at all. Like it was somebody with dark hair that like covered the back of their neck and like the height and weight and stuff. And like Shane was like very fair skinned. He had like a shaved head at the time that was like a reddish type of blonde hair. Like it was really interesting that like it was just so off. Like there was just nothing else pointing to this guy other than whatever, information that they thought he had. But he certainly didn't meet any sort of description as being there based on Clint's description.
Mom.
Right. So the other men that were charged were Zach and Dylan Adams. And they both were known for being into drugs. I believe Zach had a pretty extensive arrest record in the past, but I don't know that any of it was violent. And Dylan was a little slow. I think his IQ was in the 70s, and he actually lived with his grandfather who had to help him with financial things, and he had trouble holding a job. So, and this reminds me a lot of the West Memphis 3 case, where one of them was also of lower intelligence and ended up confessing, and kind of the confession doesn't match a lot of things that were found in evidence. So, sorry, I mean to cough. So Dylan, and the third man was Jason Autry, who was a friend of them. Shane and Zach and Dylan and Jason were frequently together. And I think that was mainly because of the drug use. And Jason Autry was also the cousin of Shane Austin. So they were charged with especially aggravated kidnapping, first-degree murder, and rape. this case, so these men were arrested in 2014, and the first trial didn't take place till 2017. Like, there was so many setbacks and weird things that went on. There was a period of time that the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation actually withdrew its services to the entire district after the prosecutor accused the agency of compromising the case by proceeding, in quotes, so slowly that the culprits were always one step ahead, and that TBI was leaking info and possibly covering up evidence. So, that's always good.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think the TBI kind of has a reputation for maybe, I don't want to say like nothing like criminal, but kind of dropping the ball maybe, or moving a little slower than people's expectations are.
Not being on their A game, yeah.
Exactly.
And so the prosecutions also criticized because it refused to produce evidence against the defendants, and they missed multiple every deadline consequence for that. So, and that's really bad for the defense because they need to see all this evidence so they can build their case, and it wasn't getting handed over. So that was a big issue too with everything. Let's see. The prosecution's case was largely circumstantial because there wasn't any DNA or forensic evidence that tied these men to the murder. They're just, because the crime scene had been so
it was
tampered
compromised.
with.
It was terribly compromised. And Jason Autry also got immunity to testify
Yes.
against Zach and what's the other boy's name? Daniel? Dylan. Yeah, Zach
Dylan.
and Dylan. And
Yeah, and he so they were initially all going to be tried together as co-defendants. And then Dylan ended up giving a confession. And then he ended up redacting it and claiming that he was coerced, and then proclaimed innocence. Along with that, Jason Autry had two attorneys that had their licenses suspended. So that caused a lot of delays because he had to have representation, and he literally had one attorney lose his license and then the next one also. So sounds great. And then in 2014, a new district attorney was elected. The district attorney cut ties with the TBI, and then the DA recused himself from the case, requested a special prosecutor be assigned. And once that happened, the TBI came back on the case. And then there was a point where the attorney for Zach Adams asked or requested the judge recuse himself because they thought that he was in favor of the prosecution and was saying things that were favorable for finding him guilty. But he did not. He remained the judge for this case. So
now, and there was I think you said this before, about the a lot of hearsay evidence and circumstantial evidence, and we've seen this before, where maybe it's like hindsight's 2020, but when we're on the outside looking in, it's like, wait a second, this is a very interesting case because it really makes you question the flow of events and the I mean, there was no evidence to collect because everything was destroyed. So, you know,
Right.
it brings a lot of attention to, these, especially when we're dealing with individuals that can be easily coerced, and you have a police department that bumbled and wants to close this case.
Yes. Yeah, and they're having so many issues with everything. So finally, in November of 2015, there was a motion filed to separate Dylan's case. And so that was granted. And at this point, this is November of 2015, Zach and Jason Autry were maintaining their innocence. Jason Autry actually gave several media interviews and referenced that the state was trying to coerce him to falsely testify against Zach. The state tried to get a gag order to keep Autry from talking to the media. It was denied. In March of 2017, they announced that they were going to be moving the trial to nearby Hardin County, and they announced at this time that Jason Autry wouldn't be on trial with Zach, as he had given a confession in January and agreed to testify against Zach in exchange for leniency. So, after 3 years of claiming innocence and his attorneys having access to discovery, he decides to make a confession. Super sketchy. All three men were eligible for the death penalty, and the state had announced that it would be seeking the death penalty. So, that's a big thing in favor of giving a confession. So, what we ended up with is Zach Adams going on trial. Dylan ended up taking an Alford plea. And he ended up with he took an Alford plea in exchange for a 35-year sentence with no parole. And his charges that he ended with were facilitation of first-degree murder and especially aggravated kidnapping. So then we had the trial for Zach Adams. So there's lots of things in this trial that I could go on and on about. I'm going to try not to. I'm just going to talk right now about the opening statements and kind of what each side was trying to bring forth. So the prosecution, in their opening statement, they talk about Zach bragging to people about killing Holly. The TBI investigated a man named Terry Britt for a year and a half before concluding he wasn't involved. And Terry Britt was a sexual offender. He was registered on the sex offender list. He was looked into early on after her disappearance by the TBI, and I'll go into that more in a little bit, but the TBI was really invested in picking him apart. Zach's girlfriend had come forth and claimed that she believed that he did it. She claims that Jason Autry and Dylan Adams were called to Shane's trailer where Zach was present with Holly's body wrapped in a blanket in the back of his truck, and he asked Jason Autry for help disposing of the body. And where did my next page go? Hold, please. And I'm sorry, that wasn't the girlfriend that said that. That was part of Jason Autry's story, was that he was called over there to help with disposal of the body.
Yeah, so Jason Autry gave this like I watched his testimony, this very detailed, he acts like it was like this, like a performance basically on the stand about how, you know, he made it very clear to say, like, I did not murder Holly Bobo, I did not rape Holly Bobo, I did not kidnap Holly Bobo, I just went to help a friend get rid of the body. And then he gave this detailed account of her still being alive when they were going to gut her to get her to sink to the bottom of the Tennessee River. And when they got to
which was his idea,
perform that act, yeah, he was very open about that. And her foot was still moving, and then he heard her moaning. So then Zach went and got a gun and shot her in the back of the head.
Yeah, there were points that he got up out of the chair and was acting out parts of it. It was very detailed in the drugs that he used and how he used them. And it's one of those things where it's like,
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So one of those things where there's too many details that aren't needed.
Yes, we've talked about this before. It's like where the lie packs onto the lie, onto the lie. It's that over speaking, that over description, that exaggerated, basically retelling of events. And I don't know, to me that just stood out. So it was so bizarre to watch, but it just, I don't know, something about it sent red flags. Now, did you get to the part yet, or you might be about to go over this, about Clint's relationship with these gentlemen, or supposed relationship?
No. I have not yet.
Are you there? Okay, sorry. I don't want to jump ahead.
Yeah, I haven't yet. So yeah, like Audie was saying, so they were going to take her to the Tennessee River, gut her, dump her in the river. When they go to move her, she makes a sound. Zach shoots her. Then he says they took her, shot her up with drugs, raped her, and killed her. I don't know. And the state says Zach had years to get rid of evidence before they found her body, which is true. Somebody had years to get rid of evidence. So the defense side. Now, there's some weird stories in this. Apparently, Tennessee has some strange punishments. Just going to say that. Okay, so the defense, of course, is claiming that Zach had no involvement and didn't know Holly. So we get to how Dylan confessed. Okay. So there's a retired police officer, Dennis Benjamin, who was friends with the Bobos and started investigating the case to help out. While investigating, he, among other things, he spoke to a man named Victor Dinsmore, who is someone that was also given federal immunity. And Dinsmore was a person of interest because he had a previous rape conviction and he lived less than 2 miles from where Holly's body was found. Dinsmore denied any involvement. So it was kind of insinuated to Dinsmore that Zach was using him as an alibi. So he then tells him that Zach is definitely their man, and the way to get to Zach is by talking to Dylan because he has an intellectual disability and a low IQ. So, police arrest Dylan on federal gun charges, and he's facing 10 years in federal prison. Now, Jason Autry was also on the radar for the ATF because they were also involved in the buying and selling of guns illegally. So after Dylan is charged with this, there's some crazy plea deal that is worked out, and his charges disappear. So he gets this no jail plea deal where Dylan is ordered to go live with Dennis Benjamin, a man he's never met. So again, this is an intellectually disabled man being sent to live with a retired police officer that's investigating the case that ended up getting him arrested.
Yes, and I have to add to this. Is it not, and this was like a court order, correct?
Yes.
Like, that is
It was
the most strange thing, I think, of any case. There's plenty of strange things in cases, but to have a court order to go live with somebody that's involved in the case, because I think he was that cop, that ex-cop or whatever he was working as like a private investigator almost for the family.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yes, he was friends with the family, and yeah, it's super weird. Yeah, it was a plea deal. So this was the arrangement that they came up with. So 5 weeks after he's been living with this retired police officer, they get a call at 911 from Dennis Benjamin saying that there's a man at his home that wants to confess to Holly's murder. And of course, this was Dylan. A lot of what Dylan said did not match the physical evidence or the cell phone records. And of course, there's no forensic evidence as him, Zach, or Jason Autry to the case. And Jason Autry's confession is completely different than Dylan's confession was. And like I said, Dylan ends up recanting his confession and claiming innocence and coercion at a later point. But I have to say that is absolutely the strangest punishment I have ever heard that was ordered by a court. And that right there is enough to make me think that so much of this case is tainted. But I guess that's how Tennessee works. I don't know.
I agree. And I think there's also, hey, Lana, there's also so much more like conspiracy. Well, I don't want to say conspiracy because I don't know if it's true or not, or I don't want to say something is a conspiracy when it could be a reality. And it is centered around the drugs and informants and this family and the brother. Like, just how could you take anything that a witness or suspect, that a witness or a suspect says that's living with an ex-cop that's friends with the family that's investigating it? Like, nothing that he has ever said in the presence of this guy, and never mind the fact of his intellectual delays, should be taken as or taken with any value. You know what I mean? Like, it's too much. It's too set up. And that's strange.
And that's what was used to arrest all three of these men, was this confession from Dylan. You know, because at that time, Jason Autry was still claiming innocence. So the arrest was solely based on the confession from Dylan. So the trial starts and we go through. One of the things that broke my heart, her mom was on the stand, and I realized that they have to identify evidence, but there was a point where they had, because Holly's lunchbox was found, and her purse, and they actually took these and gave them to the mom on the stand and was like, look in there, is this your, and I'm just like, why? And she ended up having a panic attack and passing out on the stand. And it was very heartbreaking and dramatic to watch. And the jury was in there and present for this. As soon as she passed out, of course, the jury and the media were ordered out of the courtroom. There was a nurse in the courtroom that, checked on her and made sure she was okay. And so they went back once, she'd settled down. They went back to doing testimony, and the defense, of course, asked for a mistrial because the jury has just witnessed this very emotional moment that has to. I mean, that the mom's
course it's
upset,
going
but
to-
see all that.
Yes, and it's going to affect their ability to make a fair and reasonable call. Like, it's going to taint the jury pool.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, just watching it on tape, I mean, I was in tears because it's heartbreaking. And I don't know if that's what they were trying to elicit, but it had to have affected the jury. And it's this judge. I don't know if you noticed this, Audie, if you watched any of the trial, but he was really kind of unprofessional. Besides the fact that they had asked him to be recused because he had made some comments that he believed Zach Adams was guilty. And then right before the trial started, he actually got 2 misdemeanor citations for bringing a gun into the airport. And then during the trial,
and I feel
there were things.
I mean,
go ahead.
No. Oh, sorry. No, I thought I was muted. I was yelling, not yelling, saying no to CJ because she was shooting a water gun into the house.
So there were several points during the trial where things were happening, and he made some inappropriate sayings in front of the jury. Like, at one point, the defense had made a objection for hearsay, and the judge turns to the jury and says, "Some lawyers never learn the definition of hearsay." Like, that's inappropriate. And then
and I feel like if you were a judge, I mean, I know none of us are judges. Well, I don't think, but and you're asked to recuse yourself from a case, and they cite reasons why, whether it's the defense, the prosecution, whatever. They cite the reasons why. Don't you think the more professional choice would be like, you know what? If it's on anybody's mind, then it's going to be on somebody else's mind. So better safe than sorry. Let me recuse myself to avoid because if you believe this way, chances are somebody else does, right? Like, to me, that's the professional choice, like, is to say, I'm going to recuse myself. So just right then and there is red flags. But I think this judge loved the attention this case brought. I really believe it.
Yeah. There was, at one point he made a comment that he's having trouble with relevancy, but nobody has objected. And of course, the state immediately then objected. So he was like leading the prosecution and making objections. And he also admonished the defense for being too long-winded and told them they have to finish questioning one of the witnesses that day. So I don't know.
I think, because I know Autry's testimony went something like 7 hours. And I don't even know if that was just the state or the defense or whoever was questioning, but it was 7 hours of testimony. And the judge was like, nobody's leaving this courtroom. It didn't matter how late it went into the evening, the jury, anybody, until this questioning is finished. So I interpret that as like a threat to, like, you better get finished.
Yeah. Yeah. And he actually at one point told the defense, you're being too long-winded. We need to speed this up. And it's like, that shouldn't have been said in front of everybody. Like, okay, if it's a problem, have a sidebar and tell them.
Absolutely.
Don't say that stuff in front of everybody. But so that's on top of everything else. Let's see what else. We've already talked about Clint.
So I think while you're looking at notes, another thing that Autry had testified against was that he was at the Bobo house earlier, which I didn't understand that when they said earlier because it was already so early in the morning. So maybe I misinterpreted it. Maybe it was another day, but to teach Clint how to manufacture methamphetamine,
Meth. Yeah.
which I don't think there was ever any evidence to support that Clint was either, but I could be wrong because I know you know way more of the history, but from the bit I saw that there was no evidence to support that he was a meth user or dealer at the time. But I did hear that he was a possible informant. I thought it was the mother at first,
Yeah.
but then I think to clarify that Clint was a possible informant for the police or the sheriff.
I don't never read anything about the informant. Now the meth thing,
Yeah,
yes,
so
and I find that really hard to believe. He was in college for social work, and he was very put together.
like
I mean, if
yes, put
you
together, mild mannered.
booking photos, you can kind of look at them and go, they're on drugs. You know, they
Absolutely.
have
And
that
I
look.
think meth takes a toll. Meth takes a toll on people's appearance, the way that they behave. Like that's not like a misconception or a generalization. Like it's one of the things that meth does to people. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's kind of hard to when somebody's been using meth to hide that, I feel like. I'm not saying there aren't people that do. I'm just saying that it's
especially if
atypical.
you're living at home with your parents who one is a teacher or very
Exactly.
professional people. You're not.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
your
it would be
sisters in
really
nursing.
hard to cook meth at your house whenever you're living with your parents.
Exactly. Exactly. So the conspiracy that I heard about the brother being an informant was that, of course, it was this whole theory that it was a drug deal gone bad, or something involving drugs that went bad, and Holly was the victim of that. But also that Clint being an informant, there was some accusations. Again, these are people just tossing out ideas that the police, the reason they bubbled everything so much was because they had there's some dirty cops in the force that had an active role in covering this up, and pinning it on these guys, because they weren't stand-up citizens. They had a history of getting in trouble, and so there's like a lot of those. Well, that's the main one I saw, but I'm sure there's a lot of theories out there. But that seemed to be a common thread in the comments. A lot of the comments that I was reading, that like you had mentioned, the first police officer on scene, Clint was an informant, and something went wrong, and this was the fallout from that.
Yeah. I don't know. I find it really hard to believe that, but you never know.
You don't. I mean, I'm not really don't typically buy into the dirty cop thing, but there was some kind of weird delays, and the way things were handled were so inappropriate. But then I also go to what I said before, where it's like they could just be unexperienced and
so many weird things.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of their crimes around there were drug related. I don't think that there was a lot of murders,
kidnapping. Yeah, like these high profile, or I should say like high intensity type of, where it required a lot of investigative work, evidence collection, I will say, and forensics.
The ATF was looking into these people, so
yeah, I mean, you have the government.
There was a little more involvement than.
Sure.
I don't know how that works. If the local police know that they are involved, or.
Yeah, I don't know that either, but there is. I mean, I would think when you're talking about gun running and things like that, it's like a form of organized crime. So there's like casualties to that, but I don't know. I don't believe that there was anything random about what happened to Holly. Like, I think it was somebody that either she knew or knew of her.
Yeah.
I don't think it was just like some random man walking through the woods and saw her house and decided. I mean, because the other thing is, like, like I always go back to them like kneeling in the garage if that's actually how it happened. But then I think, okay, if the person was holding a gun to her, then of course she would be more cooperative than if they were just having some sort of argument or something. You know, would
Right.
explain why she didn't scream more than she did, things like that, or grab something. But another thing that because I don't know if you touched on this, just because I did have to step away for a quick minute to deal with her, but is this what you're about to show? The cell phone stuff with the boys' cell phones? Because none of their, this is kind of going back to the whole pings, right? And the cell phone pinging and all that kind of stuff. Like, I think one of the defense's big like pieces that they were hoping would, resonate with the jury was that all three, well, we'll just say for now, Dylan and Zach, that their cell phone records show that they were nowhere near there at the time of the murder or the time of the suspected time of the crime that morning, And I mean, I guess that's where we kind of have to make the decision, or they did. Are these pings reliable or not, right? Because we've heard where they can be bounced and stuff.
Yes. And so the rest of like Clint's testimony was basically said everything about that. The only thing is they did have several voice samples for Clint to listen to, and he actually Terry Britt, which is the sex offender that they had looked into, he actually did pick his voice out as sounding similar to what he heard.
Yes, and he fits the description with the scruffy brown hair that covered his neck, the body weight, the height. Like, he fits the description as well.
Okay. So, and then the next one to testify was the officer that was first on scene. And he got the pings every 15 minutes. He took photos of the blood spots on the carport, and those photos got lost. They did get in tracking dogs, but there was a significant time delay. And he is actually one of the officers that spoke to Terry Britt on that day, about 2 p.m. that afternoon. And when he got there, Terry Britt and his wife were unloading a bathtub from a pickup truck. And he spoke with them, and I've got more details about that in a minute. And then, he didn't go back to the trail or into the woods to see if he could even see anything back there. Next to testify was a forensics. There was a palm-sized blood smear on the hood of Holly's car, and it did not match any of the men's that were arrested, any of their DNA. And when they searched Terry Britt's home, they found multiple cell phones hidden under like personal hygiene products in his bathroom. So a lot of burner phones hidden. So that was kind of strange. Someone from the Tennessee Highway Patrol testified, and his job was to ask around about local drug use sex offenders. And he says that the person that took Holly had to know these roads well because it is such a rural area, and they're narrow, windy roads. And he actually was one of the first to talk to Zach Adams because his name had come up as a local drug user several times. He says Zach came to the door, would not give his phone number to the officer. He was nervous, shaking, and wanted the officer away from his house. They then assembled a search team with dogs and searched around his house. The only thing strange was there was a mattress that was leaned up outside of the house that didn't look like it was, being thrown out. It was in decent shape. They found a bare dirt spot and they dug it up and did not find anything. And they found hundreds of marijuana plants behind the house. So that's a very good reason for him to be nervous. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be Holly. He was into drugs.
I agree with that. I think that these Zach, let's just stick to Zach for a moment. I think he was not a good guy by any means. And I think there's definitely a lot of drugs involved. And kind of going back to what we were saying before about meth users, like, you know, just take away all preconceived notions and just talk about the science of it. It makes people jumpy and paranoid and easily startled, so to speak. So I could see for sure why he doesn't want the police around his house, regardless of a girl being taken. You know, it could have nothing to do with that.
Right. Yeah. And so the next, an FBI special agent went to speak with Zach too, and he had visible scratches on his body. Now this was April 23rd of 2011. So it wasn't too long after she was abducted. And he had visible scratches on his body. He had those photographs. And the photos show long scratches to the inside of his elbow on his left arm. And Zach's explanation was that they were from briars because he had run from police after a traffic stop. And that had actually happened. So his story that he told them that day was he woke up around 10 or 10:30 on the day of her abduction, on the 13th. He was alone. He went and picked up Shane Austin, and they went to the Shell station and returned back home. And he allowed them to search his home as long as he was with them at all times. So next, and this was kind of something they leaned on, was Zach's ex-girlfriend. Had been his girlfriend for 2.5 years. And she got on stand and said it was a bad relationship, that Zach has a really bad temper, and says that she actually stayed the night with him the night of 4/12. So he wasn't alone, as he had told the FBI agent. Says Zach didn't sleep all night and woke her up at 6 a.m. saying he was going to go haul scrap metal for money. And she says she thought he was lying because he called her from Dylan's phone instead of his phone a little later. And says she noticed 3 scratches on his later that same day.
Cut
in
out
July, they got in.
Are you there?
Sorry, I don't know why.
The last thing I heard you say, it could be me. So if anybody in the chat, I apologize if I'm interrupting and it's just me. But the last thing I heard you say was 3. The girlfriend said something about 3 scratches.
Okay, yeah. So she testified that she noticed 3 long scratches on his neck later that same day. At some point in July, she says they got into a fight, and Zach said he would tie her up just like he did Holly Bobo. And then once the defense got up questioning her, it came out that she was a meth user and they used meth together. In July of 2011, she spoke to a detective and says she broke up with Zach around the time of Holly's murder. And she told that detective that Zach was home asleep when she left for work that day. So her stories changed multiple times. She, at one point, had said she was working day shift, another time a night shift, and then a double shift, and no phone call was found from Dylan's phone to hers, but there were dozens of texts and calls between Zach's phone and her that day. And her cell phone records show that she was actually at her mother's house the night of 4/12 and 4/13. So she's
Which I
not
find interesting.
very reliable.
She's not reliable. They relied on her cell phone records to determine, like, that became part of the trial, right? That she's just not reliable, and cell phone records showed. But they wouldn't use the cell phone records, or it wasn't taken seriously, that Zach and Dylan were nowhere near Holly Bobo's house that morning.
Yeah.
And I think, again, not to kind of be beating a dead horse here, but this is what's going to happen when you have meth users as your primary witnesses, because I think they do believe sometimes, like, you get people that are so actively addicted that they're retelling you a story that maybe in their mind they really do believe is what happens. Like, it's so hard. It really muddies the waters.
Yes, for sure. And especially to be dependent on that as a sticking point. So the forensic pathologist came on and said that the bullet hole in her skull is consistent with a .32 caliber, and the secondary fractures in the skull make him believe that this was a pre-mortem gunshot wound. So that was what killed her, basically, is what they're saying. Let's see. So I'm going to talk about Terry Britt for a minute, because this was very interesting to me. Terry Britt's a convicted sex offender who had been convicted of multiple rapes. He more closely fit the physical description than anyone that they arrested. He also had a history of stalking blonde women. And then there's the fact that Clint identified a voice sample of Terry Britt as very similar to the voice he heard, and he could not be ruled out as a contributor of the palm print, which I don't quite understand, because they didn't really say it matches him, but they said he couldn't be ruled out. So, at the time of Zach's trial, Terry Britt was incarcerated on an 8-year sentence. He denied knowing any of the Bobos. The defense questioned about if he was at a party where Natalie Bobo, which is a cousin to Holly, was present, and that he made advances toward Natalie that made her uncomfortable, and he denied this. He was working a newspaper route at the time of Holly's disappearance, where he delivered newspapers to local convenience stores and started very late evening until 3 or 4 in the morning. So his alibi on the day of her disappearance was that he woke up around 6 a.m. Him and his wife were remodeling their house, and they drove to Camden around 8 a.m. to look at bathtubs. They found one at Camden and then went to Decaturville to look at another, went back to Camden and purchased a bathtub. Terry Britt produced a handwritten receipt from All Goods, but the store did not have a pink carbon copy of the receipt or any record of the sale. So I feel like that's something pretty easily forged, a handwritten receipt. So Terry Britt also testifies that he did not have a cell phone at that time and had no phone registered with the sex offender registry. The defense brought up some Walmart receipts where he had purchased prepaid phones for him and his wife a month before Holly's disappearance. And just a side note that he was very nervous on the stand, fidgety, had a really dry mouth, was constantly asking for a drink of water, things like that. He says his wife was home with him all day, but her work records show that she actually went to work on the morning of April 13th, and Terry called and made her leave work. Defense questioned him about offering to plead guilty for Holly's abduction if he only gets 20 years. He denies this happened, and the TBI agent that was questioning him at the time that he said this did not read his Miranda rights, so it could not be used as evidence against him, and he denied it. So point and kidnapping. Decomposition dogs hit on a shovel in Britt's storage shed. And they did actually bug his house and had him under surveillance for a while and did not get anything of interest. So to me, and apparently to TBI, he was a very good suspect for this. And you can see here on the map that Terry Britt's house is right here where my little hand is. And Holly's is right here. So it's not a really far distance. These are the back roads, and I feel like if he is somebody that has stalked blonde women in the past, that it's very possible that he had seen Holly out and had caught his eye. And I feel like allegedly it's possible that he saw Clint's truck wasn't there that morning and decided it was his opportunity. Audie must be busy. So another interesting thing is they called a 911 dispatch to the stand, and this was about Zach. So apparently on that same date that she was abducted, April 13th, 911 got a call from Zach's grandfather at 9:47 that night. And he was saying that Zach was out of control, was handing the keys to his truck, and wanted them to come out and handle him. At 9:49 p.m., his grandfather called back to 911 and said he did not want the police to come out and respond. 2 minutes later, at 9:51, there was another call from the grandfather stating that Zach has returned and is, in quotes, raising hell and trying to get his gun. So, and there is a history with Zach of some violence with family members. His property is actually right next door to his grandfather's. I feel like that he probably runs over his family and gets whatever he wants because he's kind of demanding and using meth. I'm sure that his temper was short and they kind of gave in to him whenever he was acting this way. So, and that happened to be, that was the night after the abduction. So Jason Autry's story, Holly would have already been shot at this time. So it's interesting that he was trying to get a gun from his grandfather that late at night. That, again, doesn't add up with the confession that was given by Jason Autry. So the defense attorney got up and spoke and said that, the initial suspect in this case, which was Terry Britt, she claimed is the actual killer, stating he's never been cleared by the TBI, and in fact, it appears the government has more evidence of his guilt than it does of the 3 defendants that were charged. And, between the voice sample and the alibi not adding up and not being able to rule him out from the handprint were interesting. And his past history, he was 6 foot and 200 pounds, so he, with black hair, so he did more closely fit the description that Clint had given. And his past history extensive. It started in 1978 with his first rape, and he was convicted for 10 years. And then again in 1995, he was charged with aggravated rape and kidnapping. And this was a 17-year-old. He got 8 years for that. In 2004, he got charged with phone harassment. In 2012, he was arrested for violation of the sex offender registry, driving with a suspended license. 2012, he was charged again with aggravating kidnapping, sexual battery, and attempted rape, and got another 8 years for that. So he's got a pretty extensive history when it comes to that, but he doesn't have any murders.
Oh, sorry, I'm here. I was hearing you, and I was sent you a message in private chat, but then I figured you didn't see it. But I just didn't want you to think I bailed on you. I was listening. I just couldn't be at the computer, so I'm sorry about that.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay, I didn't mean to interrupt you either. I just wanted you to know I was here. Yeah, I agree with you, though, as far as Britt's concerned, as far as Terry Britt's concerned, or agree with the defense in the sense that he does kind of check all the boxes more than Zach and Dylan do.
Yes.
And if we're going to be passing judgment based on people's history, it's his type of crime. Like, they say that they escalate, especially these these like rapists in particular, where they get more and more violent, and then the rape isn't the same anymore, so they proceed to like murder and stuff. Like, he does kind of fit the bill. I found it interesting. He was married, right? He had a wife?
Yes.
Takes a special kind of woman to.
And I think she was complicit in some of the stalking behavior. So.
And did I mishear? Did he have something like 15 convictions, or am I exaggerating? Wasn't that many? I thought I saw that somewhere. Like, it was a lot.
He's had a lot of convictions, but they weren't all sex related.
Or a lot of charges. Yes. Okay, maybe that's what it was.
It's actually, let's see. So 3 felony rape convictions.
Yeah, and 3 felony rape convictions.
DUIs
how does somebody
and
with
stuff
3,
like that? So.
Yeah, 3 felony rape convictions. Don't you think that's I'm just venting this, would be like 30, 40, 50-year sentence at least? Really?
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. So the former TBI agent, Terry Dicus, testified, and he had been the lead investigator for the TBI in the Bobo case. And he is testifying for the defense because he actually was removed from this case. And so he had ruled out the men that were charged early on in the case because he says that Shane Austin passed a polygraph, which, doesn't mean much in court, but their alibis checked out. Their cell phone records put Zach and Holly miles apart during the critical time frame. And he stated that for Jason Autry's story to fit with the cell phone pings, men would have had to been driving like 106 miles an hour, which is highly unlikely on these winding back roads. All 4 of the men were ruled out as contributors to the palm print. So in 2013, he was removed from the Bobo case because they said that he had tunnel vision on Terry Britt. And then in 2014, he actually quit the TBI.
Interesting.
he
And
believes
this is kind of, I mean, I think this kind of goes back though to what I was saying, like where the police, why they had tunnel vision, right? Because
yeah.
I mean, I would think that the TBI's investigator, I'm sorry, any state's Bureau of Investigation, not just the TBI, it could be, you know, the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, whatever, have better investigative skills than the local police department. Like, I'm sorry, the local police department
Yes.
definitely serves a purpose, but they're not professional people that are, they're not investigating these types of crimes all year long like the TBI would be. So you would think that this gentleman's opinion and his investigative prowess would have more weight than the local police who kind of have a hard on for these, I'm going to say, like younger kids, you know,
Yeah.
and it's very frustrating.
I think that probably these men, they were persistent drug offenders, and I think the police probably dealt with them a lot, and
I agree. And they're sick
probably,
of them. There's, yeah.
didn't like dealing with them that much, and they kind of fixated on them. I don't understand why some of their first questioning was to ask around about local drug users, because it wasn't like they abducted Holly for money.
Correct. And there was no, who knows? Oh, sorry. There was no drugs found at the scene.
Yeah, I thought that was odd. And then, of course, Britt was very close to the size that Clint described. His alibi was weak because of the inconsistencies. And yes, his wife had previously accompanied him when stalking girls. The TBI agent didn't believe this was a crime of opportunity. He he says Zach Adams' name came up in the first week after disappearance because of the drug use, and they sent 4 FBI agents, 2 TBI agents with cadaver dogs to the Adams property and Shane Austin's property, and did not have any hits on anything there. So it's just interesting that he ended up getting taken off of the case because he believed somebody was a suspect, and the DA's office did not agree with that. So interesting. So
Yes, because it basically contradicts themselves because they were tunnel vision. Sorry, she's trying to go to sleep like you're talking. They were tunnel vision. Hey, that's not nice. You're upsetting everybody. Oh, okay. Sorry.
So I'll go now to Victor Densmore, who was, what did I do? Another person that was kind of iffy and who kind of turned on Zach once he thought he might be questioned. And Densmore was convicted of rape at the age of 23. He says that on April 13th, he was working for Miss Dottie, whoever that is, and Zach, Shane, and showed up. He says he smoked a joint with them. They were fighting over, quotes, who was going to hit it first. Autry broke up the fight and they left. He says that Zach hit Shane Austin and blacked his eye during this fight. Back to the given when after he lived with this police officer. He had told them that he witnessed Holly alive with his brother at Zach's home following her abduction. He told them that on April 13th, he went to Zach's house to get his truck. And Dylan said Holly was sitting in a green chair in the living room wearing a pink shirt with Jason Autry standing a few feet away. He said Zach was wearing camouflage shorts, black cutoff t-shirt, and a pair of green Crocs. Because when you're going to abduct somebody, you always wear.
I mean, they are really reliable running shoes.
Definitely. He said that Zach told him that he had raped Holly and videotaped it. And this alleged video, again, has never been found. He later recanted the confession and said he was coerced, but his led to the arrests. And then, of course, in early 2017 is when Autry gave his confession. So I'm going to try to get to that because it's really extensive. So let me find it. It's a long story. I'm going to try to not keep it too long. Sorry, I had so many papers and I am not very organized apparently. Well, apparently I suck. Let's see. Oh my gosh.
You know, I just get like, it does remind me very much, well, there are a lot of similarities to West Memphis 3 in the sense that like you have like an underserved, underrepresented, maybe, you know, kind of set up for failure group of young men who were already kind of targets based on their previous behaviors, where I think the police, like I said prior, were just sick of them and probably they did a lot of shitty stuff, but at the same time that, you know, I mean, we're talking about the potential death sentences with no forensic evidence, no hard evidence, no, you know, everything's based on hearsay mainly. And you have cell phone records that show that they're not near Holly at the time of the crime. You have a description from a witness, the brother, who it fits, you know, what's his face? Terry, not Terry. What was his name? Terry? Brinks? Brint? What am I'm saying his name wrong.
Yeah.
The habitual stalker. It's frustrating. It's definitely,
and it's scary.
One of these it's scary because it's, you know, it's one of these cases that really you have to keep an open mind and listen to everything.
Yeah. So we come to Jason Autry, and this is his confession that he gave. So he has been to prison 4 times at this point for drugs and theft, no violent crimes. He knew Zach and Dylan because of their drug involvement, and Shane Austin was his cousin. He was living with his girlfriend in 2011. So he actually had to hide his car at a local gas station because he wasn't supposed to be around his girlfriend's children per a court order. So I don't know what that's about, but yeah. So his girlfriend worked Monday through Friday and would drop him off at his car at the gas station when she went to work. So previous attorneys were disbarred, and he stated on the stand that he's hoping for leniency in exchange for his testimony. So he says the night before the murder, he spent the night at his girlfriend's house. He woke up at around 6:30 a.m. on April 13th because she had to be at work at 7. She drove him to his car, and he went to Bottoms to kill time looking at ducks and deer until he could get some morphine. So he kind of stated that that's his goal every day, is to wake up and get drugs. I guess he buys them daily. He claims that he eventually got a hold of Zach around 8 a.m. and Zach told him he was busy, and when he got to a and he would call him. So he started driving in the direction of Shane Austin's house. During that time, Zach called and told him to go to Shane Austin's house because he needed help. Jason stated he thought he was probably having issues cooking meth. It took 20 to 30 minutes to get to Shane Austin's house. So, up here is where the starting point for Jason Autry is, where he was staying. The Camden bombs are up here, and it's right by the Tennessee River. It's just like almost like swampland. And there is a cell tower here that actually did ping at 6:51 for Jason's phone. So that is consistent with him being in that area at that time. And then Shane Austin's house is in this area here. So he would have started coming this way towards Shane's house. He got to Shane's and he says the gate was open and there was a large fire in a burn barrel. He said Dylan was in the doorway of the trailer with his shirt off. Shane was walking around with a pistol in a holster on his right side, saying everyone needed to get the hell out of there. Zach was outside. So Jason says he bought a morphine pill from Zach and shot up. Zach asked Jason to help bury the body, and Jason said he initially thought the body was a guy named Jojo because Zach had previously mentioned wanting to kill him. So Zach told him it's not Jojo, it's Holly. Jason said he didn't know who she was. The body was in a multicolored farm-style blanket, which is like details, especially after he had just shot up with morphine and meth. I'm sure he's going to remember what color the blanket was and all of that.
Yep. It's crazy. He's very detailed in his testimony. Like, if anybody goes to watch it, he's like almost acting out, like his mannerisms, his movements. It's wild.
Yeah, and my whole thought process watching that was, you just shot up morphine and meth. There's no way you remember all this.
I mean, yeah, I agree. Again, the science doesn't support it.
So Jason says, yeah, I'll help you, but he wanted to leave his car somewhere else. So he says, so Dylan and Shane wouldn't know he was involved, which they're right there. So that doesn't make sense either. So they drove down the road just a little bit and got to Yellow Spring Church. Jason said he left his car there and got into Zach's truck. They drove towards 641. They didn't have a plan. So he said as they drove, Jason pointed out that they have no shovels or pickaxes to bury a body. And Jason then makes the comment that he'd been under the I-40 bridge before a few years ago and saw a body, and the intestines were holding the body up. So he suggested that they gut her and put her in the deep sloughs and at the edge of the Tennessee River, and that the turtles would get rid of the rest of the evidence. So, yeah, I can't say I've ever just wandered upon a body floating and knew the intestines were keeping it above water, but...
And that's just stood out to me when he was describing, like, how to ensure that the body would sink. I thought, I don't think this guy's like a anatomy expert or a physics expert.
No, not by any means. where the bridge crosses the Tennessee River. And there's a little ramp that goes under it. Let me see. I don't know if I can get to it. So many things open.
I think I can blow it up. Is that a little better? If I make it full screen like that?
Well, I'm trying to switch to the interactive one.
Oh, there we go.
Did it switch?
Yes, it switched. Yep, you're good.
Okay. So underneath this bridge, and this also sounded really kind of unbelievable to me, is this is it's on I-40, this bridge, and there's a lot of traffic, and when you look at where it is, I don't know how people crossing the bridge would not see them down there gutting a body, but let me get, where am I at?
Well, again, it goes to the, like, you just pointing that one thing out kind of speaks to the credibility. Like that's very obvious. Like you have two men essentially cutting into a woman's body or doing anything in the bed of a pickup truck. It's open to the air with a body on a very busy road. I would think, I don't know Tennessee at all, but I'm going to assume that's like a main thoroughfare. Where it's visible
it's an interstate.
Where they're at is visible. Yeah. To the roadway. Like it just, and that nobody saw anything unusual. Like even a passerby saying, you know what, I did happen to drive past at the time and there was, whatever. I don't know. To me, it's just, I guess not everybody pays attention to what's going on around them. But again, it's just too much. It's too much of a stretch for me.
Yeah, so this is and of course it looks, the interstate doesn't go down in the water like that. So there was a pile of limestone riffraff here, right where this is. It's gone now, but when I looked at it before, closer to the time this happened, it was right here. And so part of his story is that they had laid her up against this pile of limestone. So that's the part that made me go, okay, well, I could see if they were maybe like under the bridge doing something, but
yeah,
they're going to bring her out here and lay her against this limestone, and like you could see that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not discreet, that's for sure.
Yeah. So they removed the body from the bed of the truck. He said there was a small amount of blood in the truck. He never looked in the blanket. He said he got the torso, Zach got the feet. They propped her up against this limestone and they saw her foot move and heard a noise from the blanket. So Zach got a pistol that Jason said was the same pistol Shane had earlier from the truck. Jason walked around to make sure nobody was around. He heard the gun go off. He thought he heard 3 to 4 shots, but thinks it was one shot that echoed. He said there were birds around. The birds all flew off. They heard a boat start somewhere. So they grabbed the body quickly and loaded it back in the truck and drove away. He said Zach was driving really fast. He told him to slow down so they didn't look suspicious after the gunshot. Jason said he needed to get back to Benton County so he could eat lunch with his girlfriend. So he was going to take him back to the church to his car. While they were driving, Jason asked how it happened, and Zach's story, supposedly, that he told Jason was that Holly Bobo was sleeping with him for drugs and had suggested that Holly could do a threesome with them. And so that's all he said, so I don't know what happened.
And just to remind everybody, he was offered immunity, correct? He was given full immunity
leniency
for his testimony? Or leniency? Okay.
No, leniency, yeah.
Okay.
So Jason got back to his car. He said he didn't have time to go see his girlfriend for lunch. He texted her. He saw Zach pulling back into Shane's and then continued to try to make it to Benton County. At 2:15 that afternoon, Jason called Zach again asking for a morphine pill. Like, why didn't you buy more than one? Zach didn't have one, so they were going to go to Victor Densmore for a pill. And they did say that Densmore was working at Miss Dottie's. Jason got to Zach's around 2:30. Shane, Dylan, and Zach were in front of Shane's Silverado. Zach's white Nissan they drove earlier wasn't there. He said there was in the air like they'd been fighting. So Zach was driving, and Dylan, Shane, and Jason were in the back. He said Zach and Shane were arguing as they pulled in. He claimed that Shane Austin was saying, "You didn't have to kill her," and Zach said, "You're just as guilty. You hit it." And then Zach hit Shane. He says that Densmore came out and stopped the fight. They purchased a morphine pill. Zach told Densmore that he had moved some rims out of his shop so he could park his truck there. And he said that this was the first time that Jason had met Densmore, and this started a drug relationship between the two of them. They went back to Zach's, and he had to get back to Benton County by 3:30, so he left. So 2 days later, he talked to Zach. They met up, and Dylan was there. They went to a spot to smoke a joint. Let's see. Zach had told him that they threw her body out near Kelly Ridge. He said Dylan hadn't slept since it had happened and won't stop running his mouth. And Zach told Jason that his grandpa would probably die in a few years, and if Jason would kill Dylan, he would promise him some of the inheritance.
Jeez.
Jason said he'd have to think about it.
I mean, doesn't it seem like just from these few events, that your most recent ones that you just spoke on, like a lot of people supposedly were aware of this, right? And these are not the most like stable individuals.
Right.
And the only one that provided testimony like this is Jason, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the type of people that you would expect to talk, right? To either protect themselves, or they're just, like you said, running their mouths. They're all actively using so many drugs. Just in this 1 day period, it sounds like a lot of drugs were exchanged and done.
Yes. And not just like pot, like morphine and meth.
Morphine, methamphetamine, and then marijuana. I mean, we don't know if there was alcohol involved, but I mean, a lot of altered mentation, so to speak. I mean, it's just not credible, I guess. Like the recall, like somebody's recall of these events based on like what was they were all participating in, it's just so unreliable.
Yeah, definitely. Not doing any drugs, I would not remember this. I mean, he didn't confess until 2017. 2015, I think. 2 years later. So, I would not remember this many details from 2 years prior without being on drugs. So, I don't know. So he said he needed to think about it. He went to Shane Austin's. He said Shane was drunk, and there were search parties all around the area. And Shane was frantic. So he said he got Shane in his car, and they, God, my notes. So they drove around.
You make such a good point. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were looking through yourself. I was going to just say, While you were doing that, you make such a good point about just the memory alone. Like, I don't think most of us could recall in detail.
Yeah, because it wasn't like it
it's
was
traumatic. A week, a month, even multiple months. We're talking years later.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just this whole thing is just so bizarre. And there's just so many like back also like
Yes.
deals and promises between the prosecution and all the suspects and the witnesses. There's just a lot of that business going on as well, which always makes me think that the prosecution is not secure in their case when they're making all these promises and deals because they don't have enough evidence to try the case, like to try it on their own. You know what I mean? Am I making sense when I say that?
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah. So he took Shane to eat and took him back home. Nothing really came of that. So a few days later, he called Zach and asked if the offer still stood. Zach said yes. So Jason said he would set up a date to take Dylan to the river and kill him. So he showed up one day, surprised Dylan, lured him into going by offering to take him bass fishing. They went to the Tennessee River, put the boat in. They were there an hour or so drinking. A boat pulled up beside them, and the guy knew Dylan's grandfather and the guy that Jason had bought the boat from. So he canceled his plans to kill him because they had been spotted. Dylan was very drunk at that point and talking. He told Jason where the rape had occurred. This was at a barn near Shane's grandmother's house. They went there. The barn is severely deteriorated, like no roof on it. He didn't see anything to be cleaned up, so they left. So this is where the story, in August of 2012, Jason and Zach were caught at Eagle Creek stealing a deer stand. They were high on meth. And this was the time that Zach had told Jason the real reason they had been there that day was to show Clint how to make meth. They got there early, and Holly came outside screaming and telling them to leave, so they took her.
Correct. That's a lot of what I was watching was like, for whatever reason, hyper focused on that testimony that that's why they were there. She heard them, came outside, started making a fuss. But again, now assuming that Clint's telling the truth, he still describes only one person being there, not multiple.
Right.
I mean, we still only have one person at the scene of the crime. And I'm sorry, I'm a little bit hung up on that handprint. Like, now that you brought attention to that, and I think I know when you wrap up your timeline, I recall this, and I just want to make sure I cite it correctly, but remind us to talk about the inconclusive handprint again, because I want to touch on that.
Okay. So let's see. So Zach admitted to him that he had raped Holly, described it as a brief encounter, and had mentioned something about somebody out nearby mowing a yard. Jason had been present when Shane Austin had purchased the gun, and he identified that gun as the murder weapon. Let's see. So this is where the kind of the phone stuff comes in, because there was a lot of like the phone records just didn't match up with the story that Jason was telling. The times, there were calls that showed on the phone that he didn't mention. There was a lot of texting back and forth that he didn't mention. And even though they have I can't think of what it's called, but where they can strip a phone and get everything off of it, even if it's deleted. Well, that only works for a certain amount of time. Once you delete something, there's an empty spot in your storage where that was. Once that storage is replaced with something, you can't pull that deleted piece anymore. So they didn't really look into these guys until 3 years later. So they wouldn't have been able to pull text. They were able to get phone records of what was back and forth, but not the actual texts. So the phone records show that Jason called Zach at 8:55 a.m. that morning, and this is supposedly where he said he was at Shane Austin's house at the time, and Zach said he needed to see him. So let me go back to if I can get to it. My crazy confusing map here.
It's okay. I can see whatever. If you're on the map with like the Google Earth wonky bridge, like the distorted bridge, that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, I got one where I've marked this cell phone just because it makes it a little easier.
I think
because I've kind of,
this is it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the pings kind of go, and now cell phone pings are not the same as GPS. There is, each cell phone tower has 4 sectors, and there's a distance that it picks up, and I don't remember. It's not as precise as what GPS is, but it was precise enough that they could tell which sector of the tower it was coming from, so they could even tell what direction the phone is picking, the signal is picking up from. So so this is where Jason's starting point was, and then his first ping for his phone was at 6:51 a.m. and it was from this tower here. So the following pings that showed up for his phone were this tower that was right here. And then there was a period of inactivity where nothing picked up. And the last one came from this tower here. And you know what? I may have a better way of doing that. Let me see if I can pull something else up. So I think there was one time during the day that their cell phone pings were actually in the same place. And it was at that last tower. And it doesn't match up with his story at all. And it doesn't match up with where Holly's phone was pinging from. And like I said, it's not an exact science. There is a larger room of error, but I still feel like it's fairly dependable whenever they're giving you what direction the phone is pinging from.
Absolutely. And I think when you're talking about in criminal court, like if it's going to be used at all, right? So either, in my opinion, either you trust the science and you use it and it applies across the board, or you don't, and you throw it out and don't use it in any circumstance. And I'm not even talking case by case. I am talking case by case. In this particular case, there were times they relied on cell phone tower information and pings, and then there were times they said, well, it's a little questionable. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's got to be either a trust at the time. Now, again, whenever, this was prior to GPS, so it was the best that was out there. So, but I think you explain it perfectly. Like, it's not a perfect science, but it's enough to at least give a baseline. And we're talking about like a significant difference in locations. And it totally debunks the story of an already unreliable witness.
Right. Yeah. So, and this is my beautiful handwritten because I couldn't get it to lay out the way I wanted to. So you can see at 6:51, you've got Jason Autry pings at the Highway 641 tower, which was right by where he was staying with his girlfriend. At 7 a.m., Holly, her phone pings off of her home tower. At 8:17, you get the first ping from her phone that is off of her home tower, and this is at a Shiloh tower. So you look at the same time, 8:17 a.m., and you've got Zach is pinging off of a Cox Tower, Sector 2, which is his home tower. And you have Jason Autry pinging off Cox Tower, but it's Sector 1, so it's a different direction than where Zach is. Then again at 8:30, they're in the same positions. Zach is still at his home tower, and Jason is still off Sector 1 of that tower. At 8:53, you've got Zach in a different sector of Cox Tower, so he's moving, and you have Jason still off Sector 1. At 8:58, you still have Holly at the Shiloh Tower. Zach is back at his home tower, and there's a long period of no activity from Jason Autry's phone. And I guess I'm not sure how pings work. I guess they can't go back and ping phones after the fact. It has to be active pinging. So the only time that they are able to get locations on those two phones is when they're making or receiving calls. So from this 8:58 time period to 9:25 or 9:42, there's not any calls coming or going from Jason's phone that give a location. So at 9:02, Holly's phone pings at Cox Tower Sector 3. Now 9:10 is the only time that we have someone in the same area as Holly, and this is at Zach's home tower. But it's very short-lived. At 9:25, her phone is pinging off the Parsons Tower, and this is her final ping. Whoever had her took her cell phone and dumped it, and took the SIM card out and dumped it separately. So this final ping at Parsons Tower was 9:25. And then you have Jason picking up at 9:42 at Birdsong Tower, and Zach picking up at 9:50 at Birdsong Tower. And this Birdsong Tower is significant because there is a lot of drug activity in this neighborhood. And so I think there was some insinuation by some of the law enforcement that testified that this area they looked at their cell phone records for the past month to see if it was out of the ordinary for them to be in that area. And it was frequented by these two a lot, and it was a known drug activity area. So,
it still bothers me that when the police officer asked, and again, it could just be like he just didn't know, and I don't want to be overthinking it, but requesting those pings every 15 minutes versus even every 5 or 3, if he didn't want to do every minute, is frustrating.
Yeah. Yes.
It really is. Because so much can happen in a 15-minute period.
So the times like the 8:58 and 9:02 on Holly's phone, someone was trying to call her. So there was pings in between his 15 minutes, but that was only if someone was trying to reach her phone and it sent out a signal.
Correct.
And so some of the questioning that the defense did with Jason was like asking him about the drug use that day. And he said that he did sit in the car for about 10 minutes because he had to melt down the morphine pill and cook. I don't know how you do all that. Whatever. You got to cook it and then inject it. And that takes about 10 minutes. And he says then the euphoria does affect his perception of time.
Oh, I'm sure it does, because he probably nodded out for the majority of it. And
Yeah.
that was before the drug companies started coding the OxyContin and the MS for whatever, you know what I'm talking about. The MS Contin and the OxyContin. At that time, they were still tablets. They were not coded to where they cannot be supposedly melted down. But now they're made supposedly to not be able to be melted down. So just a little tidbit of info for you, for not you, I know you do that, for anyone listening.
And he said he didn't remember.
Sorry. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
He said he didn't remember the actual colors of the quilt, but just that it was a farm work pattern patches.
Such an unusual description, like not like, oh, it was plaid, or oh, it was checkered or striped. Like farmhouse pattern is just unusual. Also, like if anybody's ever been, okay, now again, these are people that use daily, okay, but still, even though we know, like when somebody's using opiates or heroin, they're kind of always chasing the dragon because it's never going to be like that first high. That aside, for anybody that's ever, let's say, been in the hospital setting and had IV pain medication, I mean, I can certainly attest to this. It is very disorienting. Like in the moment, like you don't know if a minute's passed or 20 minutes or an hour. Like I've shared my experience where I was in the hospital once. I swear to God, I went in, I woke up, it was 4 days later, I was home on my mom's couch. Like it's very disorienting. And these people are kind of living in a permanent fog anyway. So, I mean, once again, it just bothers me that like they're specifically this Autry's recollection of events was taken so seriously and used as fact. That's all. Sorry, I was rambling.
No, you're fine. And so the defense also questioned him how him and Zach were discussing dumping this body, and Shane and Dylan did not overhear them talking. And so he says that Dylan never came out of the doorway of the house, and Shane was throwing stuff into the burn barrel, so it was too loud for them to hear. He said that early 2000 is when he saw the body in the Tennessee River, and he never reported it. And
it's lovely.
It really seemed to me like he had a very well rehearsed story, and when they asked him details, he had a hard time filling in things that weren't rehearsed.
Yeah, like the things that were not probably either fed to him, because I do think there might have been some of that. I know I go back and forth, but I feel like he was well prepped, so to speak. And yes, and when asked to elaborate on details, he's unable to. Like you can't remember the pattern on a blanket from years ago, but then not be able to fill in other details, or remember all these really like this minutia from the day, but then not remember the pertinent events if this stuck out to you so clearly. Like, are we the only people seeing this? We're not the professionals. Come on, law enforcement and, you know, the prosecution. But I mean, I guess that's the defense's job, is to kind of pull that apart.
Yeah, he, there was another thing. So his timeline put them at the river at around 9:35 to 9:40 a.m. Well, at 9:42, his phone shows a call from his mother, and he spoke to her for like 45 seconds. So while in the process of disposing of this body and her moving, and he stopped to talk to his mom to answer a question. I can't remember what he said.
Yeah, but the fact that you even answered the phone, the phone was answered.
Yeah.
So that's enough to
Yes.
say, okay, hello.
Yeah. Hmm. A lot of the times when he was getting questioned by the defense, he would repeatedly start off by saying, "I testified to this." So it was very, he was trying to really stick to what he had already said and not stray from that. So Jason wrote a letter to his wife in January saying he'd be home by Christmas, the year of this trial, 2017. He had already begun cooperating with authorities, so you can probably see from this what he thought he was going to be getting from the deal.
Exactly.
At the same time,
this is what I meant before. Yeah, like he was
Yeah.
made promises by the state, and he wasn't the only one that was given like all these sneaky backhanded deals to like just get these other kids or gentlemen, you know, prosecuted and found guilty. It's just that in itself is just I don't know, I'm just not sold. I'm just not sold on. If I was on that jury, I don't know where my head would be at.
Well, he was also writing another woman that he also told that he would be getting out soon and they would get married, even though he's already married. So
Yeah, I mean he's a nut job. I mean that was quite obvious.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So some of the things that when you go back to look at it, there's a police officer that works night shift that lives across the street from Shane's grandmother's house and the barn. He got off work the morning of April 13th and mowed his yard from about 7 to 9 a.m. He can see the barn from his property. The barn's no longer there. But that morning, he said he did not see any vehicles. He didn't see any people. He didn't hear any noises. And according to Jason's story, the rape would have happened in the barn between 8 and 8:30 that morning. So that's something.
Did he testify, the neighbor, the officer?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And then there was a satellite installer that got to Shane Austin's trailer about lunchtime to install a satellite that day, and nobody was there but Shane Austin. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Shane was very calm. So there's that. Let's see. And then there's the talking about Victor Dinsmore that I started earlier by accident. Because in his testimony, he does not say that they bought morphine pill from him, which was the main reason that Jason said they were going to Dinsmore's was to get a morphine pill, and says that they did get it. He also, Dinsmore also says that he did not have Zach park his truck in hiding at his property. So that was another thing that Jason had brought up that did not play out by other testimonies.
So kind of back to what I was saying earlier when I was doing my research on this and looking at like the different YouTube story or coverage that different YouTube creators have done on this case, as well as some mainstream media. When you look at a lot of the comments, just the public's opinion, and I was saying it's quite mixed with different feelings, opinions, conspiracies. But a big one that I noticed, a common theme was blaming Clint, that it's his fault that she was abducted and killed, and either his fault because he didn't react quick enough, or do the right, or didn't react appropriately, or why didn't he chase them down into the woods, things like that. there's that opinion, and then there's also the opinion of that he was a police informant, that he was an informant, and there was a lot of drugs surrounding this, and that this was some sort of a retaliation type of thing for him, snitching, and they took his sister as punishment, so to speak, and then there's people that think he did it, that the brother did it.
Yeah.
That they believe that he murdered his sister, and this whole story was a fabrication, and that somehow, Autry and the brother were in on it together, as far as the cover up and stuff. So there's a lot of opinions out there about what actually happened here. But her mother, when I watched after. Well, I'll let you finish with the trial, what happens at the trial, but she seemed at peace. That's all I'll say.
Yes. I think the family is happy with the outcome, and so I won't spend too much more time on the trial because we've already been on here a long time, but basically, he was found guilty. He was charged with he was sentenced to life without parole, and then and 2 consecutive 25-year terms. So he will not be getting out.
Well, he appealed. So I sent you a message. I couldn't find much. Well, I probably should have did a little bit more research, but he in the process of filing. Well, I'll tell you right now. What's his last name? What's Zachary's last name?
Adams,
thank you. I'll tell you right now. Let me see what I see. Okay.
I think it's denied.
He's denied. Yeah, he was denied the appeal in 2020. Hardin County judge denies Zach Adams 56 motions for retrial in the Holly Bobo case.
Yeah.
My gosh, if you see a picture of him now, it is like looking at a completely different person. Yeah, he's sentenced to life without parole plus 50. Yeah.
And so Jason Autry ended up entering an Alford plea and got 8 years to run concurrently for each charge. However, with time served at the time of sentencing, he was released the next week.
Well, that Alfred plea is very interesting because you're not pleading guilty, but it basically you're saying that
there's enough evidence to charge you.
Yes, that there's enough evidence to charge you, but you're not admitting to guilt. It's a very kind of fascinating approach to justice. I don't know. But I wanted to see go ahead. I'm sorry.
So he was released in September of 2020. In December 2020, he was arrested again because he was seen lying in a field wearing only pajama pants. A police officer stopped and spoke to him after a call about a suspicious person. The officer went and talked to him and said that his statements were kind of not making sense, but he didn't have any warrants, so he was free to go. Jason started walking away, and the officer noticed a rifle on the ground where he was laying. When the officer tried to ask him about this, Jason Autry attempted to flee. His vehicle was nearby and had ammo and meth in the vehicle, so he was charged with possession of a gun by a felon, possession of meth, and evading arrest. And he's still in being held for that. He has not been to trial for that yet. So, outstanding citizen.
Yeah, I mean, he's no winner. But it looks like the last thing I see here was that the judge denied, there was 56 motions, I guess, if I'm using the right language, on this appeal. And it basically, 56 motions, and it included claims the judge should have allowed specific evidence. the unfair witness process and several points of contention with permitted testimony during the trial. Judge McGinley denied all 56 reasons. Now, it says that since that was denied, he can appeal his case to the Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals because it was a Hardin County's court's decision. So now he can go to the state, which I don't know if he plans on doing. I don't know.
I don't think he's going to get anywhere with that judge.
Well, no. It's the same judge, right? McGinley?
Yep.
Yeah, like that's just, I don't understand that when you go for an appeal, why it goes in front of the same judge. I mean,
I don't either.
Wouldn't it make more sense to put it in front of like a non-bias? I mean, let's just see that this judge wasn't already kind of a dick, but like in front of a judge that had no preconceived notions, if that's a better way to say it. Like did not sit through all the testimony and didn't have all his snarky comments. You would think that alone would be enough to say, I don't know, it just doesn't seem fair.
Yeah.
And the justice system is supposed to be fair. So it's a little frustrating that I don't know if that's how it occurs in all states and counties, And I'm still, I mean, there's certainly a chance that a very small chance based on the evidence, but there is a chance that Zach did it. But I'm still kind of stuck on Terry Brinks. What about you? Like, I feel like he fits like the profile, and like the little bit of evidence that exists points more towards him, like you had said earlier, and like the TBI had said. Then
that's kind of some questions. The main questions I had on this case were like, so his wife claims that he called her and said she had to come home because there was something major going on that day. So why would he make his wife leave work to go buy a bathtub that he admitted he didn't install until a few weeks later? So she missed a full day of pay to go pick up a bathtub, And he said that he had his paper route until 3 or 4 in the morning, and then claims that he woke up that morning at 6 a.m. and waited for his wife, and they left the house at 8 a.m. So he got home at 3 and slept for 3 hours to get up and go buy this tub that he wasn't going to install.
Excellent point. Yeah. No, it's. I mean, that's why I do like when you start to point things out like that, and then you hear about like, because in the article from Jackson's Son, I don't know how reliable of a source it is. It says that, hold on, where did I see about, what's his name? Autry. Hold on. During the trial, Autry testified that Adams asked for help to bury a body, blah, blah, blah. We already went over all that. I just read it. It said that he did get federal immunity. Yeah, okay. Autry was offered federal immunity for his role in Bobo's death in return for the testimony. So, I mean.
But he didn't get immunity because he got sentenced, so. He got leniency.
Oh, because they ended up, that's right. Yes, because what ended up happening, I'm sorry, you're right. And then that's what this article says. But then when you said that again about the leniency, they started not to so much buy into his story as much. But he had already testified and the jury heard it. Like the damage is done.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's so frustrating. Just
like
up a little bigger.
A neighbor had reported that morning that there had been a white truck that was driving by really fast that morning. Not much of a description, but a white truck. Well, Zach's truck was a white truck, and to get to that point at the bridge, they drove down that interstate a good while in a white truck with a body in the back. Like, they weren't stopping people. I don't know.
Well, that's another thing. You're right. Like, I mean, it was handled poorly to begin with, right? Like the whole investigation part. But I really I would love to find an interview if it exists, or if he wrote a memoir, the TBI agent that actually ended up resigning from the TBI.
He did write a book. I'm going to get that.
Oh, did he? Okay, because I would like to hear more about his oh my gosh, like hypothesis. I can't think of the word, but like his conclusions based on the evidence. I mean,
yeah,
I said this earlier. I even said it in chat. Like Nevaeh had said, like cases have been won based upon circumstantial evidence before. That was her comment. I was like, yes, of course, but this case in particular was based on hearsay, and which pointed more towards Terry Brinks. Oh, and about the palm print, the inconclusive palm print. So I was having a little trouble, but I know there was another case that like I was following. It wasn't a recent one. It was like an older case that I was reading where this has come up before. And basically what I recall learning from it was that like when they're doing fingerprinting and like how they match, like, you know, the rings and everything, that basically there was enough to say, oh, it could be, but not like let's say you need 500 matching rings. There could only be 40, right? Whereas the other people could be completely excluded. He could not be completely excluded, nor could he be included, so to speak. But there had to be some sort of a match within there, of even if it was just a small amount of these rings or whatever. I don't know the technical term for it. That still, again, and I understand that's not admissible, but when does common sense prevail? I mean, if we're basing this whole entire trial on hearsay, that stupid inconclusive palm print is more valuable than like a guy on meth and morphine years later testifying about what he may have seen.
Yeah. And you've got a history of stalking blonde women.
Yeah.
She's a very pretty girl that lives nearby and probably saw that Clint's truck wasn't there because he's not that far from her. If he was stalking her, he would be,
Yep, knows their routine. And his wife's complicit in his stalking, supposedly. Which would be interesting to why he rushed her home from work.
Yeah.
Versus buying a bathtub or whatever the case is that they said.
Yeah.
So this is a real interesting one.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I hate it because
it's frustrating.
These are bad guys. They're not good guys. You know, they've done a lot of things. But I don't think that they should be in prison for murder.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that's where sometimes it's hard, though, I guess, when you're sitting on a jury and if they bring up like all these behaviors and you see all these things people are participating in and you're trying to separate that from the actual case at hand. I mean, I guess that's the prosecution's job, right? But it would be really unfortunate if, you know, it comes to you have Zach in particular sitting in prison for the rest of his life for a crime he didn't commit, you know?
Right. Yeah.
But there's a lot of good documentaries, or I'm not sure about. I think there's one documentary that I was able to catch part of, but a lot of like of the bigger true crime channels, like the big ones that have covered it and done like a really good like a 20-minute synopsis and stuff. So there's good information out there on this and really make you think. And that's what this case did for me. It just really made me think.
Yes. Yeah, I don't, like I said, I don't buy into the whole cop conspiracy thing, but I do believe that there's biases and there's people that they deal with frequently. And just like they think the TBI got tunnel vision, I think that they did too.
I agree. And I think that's probably more realistic explanation than like a whole conspiracy with the informant and a bad deal or something happening and the cops being involved. I think it's more likely that they just really had a hard on for these kids or guys. They're not kids. I keep saying that, but I'm old now. So everybody in their 20s is a kid, but you know, had a hard on for these guys. They were disruptive to the community. There was there's this meth epidemic that they're a part of amongst the opiates and stuff. So I could see why, the cops wanted them off the streets. But
Yeah.
because it really was like the forensic side of this case was botched from the beginning. I mean, there's no evidence. There's nothing. I mean, how do you not, like you said, like even like roadblocks and stopping cars as people are coming and going, that's frustrating. Now, could the brother have done more? What do you think about that? I mean, I feel like none of us know what we would do in that circumstance.
I just don't. I've seen a lot of interviews with him, and I just feel like he had just woken up. He was disoriented. He thought that this was the boyfriend, who had been out hunting. I can see the confusion of that morning being. I can understand that. I'm not somebody that wakes up and is real clear-headed and would.
Yeah, and ready to go grab a gun and
everything.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
And I think people forget like the time frame. Like this all happened relatively quickly as well. Like it's like, of course, when we're discussing it and we're talking about it, it makes it seem like this was like an all morning event, that went on. But the reality is when you're living it in real time, I can only imagine a lot of people watching his interviews, like that have commented on them, had pointed out that they felt like, I saw a lot of comments about, well, he was probably on drugs. How could you sleep through a scream, but then wake up when the dogs are barking and not wake up from the screaming? Like I saw a lot of that. And I also saw a lot of, he doesn't look sad. He's not crying. Why is he not torn up? But some of these interviews, nothing for nothing, we all grieve differently. And I would never judge anybody by the way they do. And a lot of these interviews are years and years later. They already waited and suffered to even take this to trial and get any sort of justice. So I feel like
and I swear there was an interview where he said he had his surround sound on in his room. And very much but the dog was in his room barking. So a scream outside with your surround sound on, you may not hear, but a dog barking in your room,
next to your head,
wake you up.
Yeah. And I think also the one thing, though, I will say, I mean, I would never, whatever happened that day, for whatever reason, and I don't know if it's like a mother's intuition, but her mother in her interview after the verdict said like she was so proud of the prosecution. She thinks that God, her exact words were like, God blessed us with this amazing prosecution and they've gotten justice for Holly. I mean, she was very like confident on whatever she heard in that courtroom that this is what happened. But I think also like as a parent, I can only imagine the desperation.
Yes. Yeah. And it had been so many years and
so many years.
Answer. And I also saw the interview with Zach and Dylan's mom, and it kills me for her because she 100% does not think her boys did this. And she knows they had issues, but she doesn't think they're killers. And
that I can't get over that picture of Zach. I mean, it just looks like different human being. It's wild.
When you're not on drugs, it's amazing.
Yeah. It just looks completely different. But so I think we're ready to wrap it up. We'll call it a day for Holly Bobo, and may she rest in peace. And hopefully, if there's any more truth out there that needs to come to light, and it means that these people, well, Zach in particular, because the other one's in prison for the other charges, right?
Yeah.
His brother,
Jason,
Dylan
is. Oh no, Dylan's in there for the.
That's what I mean, the gun stuff, right?
No. He's in there for for Holly.
Wait, who got picked up in the field with the gun? And
Jason Autry.
So he's back in for the gun stuff, unrelated to Holly Bobo.
Yes.
So this Dylan and Zach are
reliable testimony.
Yes. So hopefully, if there is any sort of truth out there, like the hidden DNA or some sort of evidence, like if I don't know, if they're really innocent, then I hope they get justice as well. But I don't know. It's a
Yeah,
tough
I
one.
wish the Innocence Project would pick them up, but
It's so hard, like with the Innocence Project, because I can imagine. I mean, I don't know what their criteria is.
and then I also think about the mom and how the family would feel about it. That it's hard.
Of course, yes, like it's reopening a wound. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But all right, well, we'll wrap it up for today. Have a good Memorial Day weekend, everybody. And if you have sunshine, enjoy it.
Yes.
It's not very nice here. And thank everybody for coming. And we will hopefully, I don't know, next weekend may or may not be. I may or may not be here, but we'll talk about it.
Okay.
All
Sounds
right.
good.
Have a good one, everybody. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.